And we're recording. Welcome everybody. This is the Kubernetes SIG Network meeting for July 22nd, 2021. Dan has volunteered to run triage for us today.
Can you see my screen?
Looks good.
All right. So the first one we have is Kube Proxy. Connection kept alive through readiness checks fails and pod not ready. It looks like Antonio had some comments.
Yeah, that seems like not a bug.
Yep.
All right. Shall we note that and then close it?
I mean, he said he was quoting docs in the initial comment, so we may need to clarify docs or something.
Okay. All right. In that case, yeah, okay.
You're gonna sign it to me and I'll just fill
Okay.
something out.
All right, thanks, Casey. Next up, Ingress Nginx custom backend for errors.
Assign that to me, then I can take a look and direct the user to the right people, please.
Okay, sorry, I don't have the camera window up. Who was that?
That's Ricardo.
Ah.
Thanks. RIKATZ.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. And so this one, we still have needs triage on, and it looks like there's been a lot of discussion, but that was after last week's meeting. It's already assigned to Rob.
Yeah, that's on me.
Should we take off needs triage at least?
Yeah, I let me follow up. This is 10.3. Yeah, I'll pull it up.
Okay, I mean, I can take off needs triage right now if you want.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. All right. Next, use of closed network connection caused the node status to become not ready. And I will scroll to the bottom to see if anybody has said anything about it. Nope, just more of that. Does this look familiar to anybody?
Doesn't look familiar to me, but I wonder if it's a SIG network thing. It's like about kubelet talking to API server, right?
Yeah. Do they say what network plugin they're using? Because it also looks like the network plugin is failing to set up the sandbox, which is probably for the same reason.
Yep.
Okay. Well, we will ask that. All right. Does anybody want to follow up more? Any volunteers? Anybody, or should I pick a victim?
You can give this one to me too.
All right. All right, last one. Feature request. Custom HTTP method on ingress HTTP path. And it looks like we have no response yet. Does anybody from the gateway side want to take a look at this one?
Yeah, you can assign that to me.
Okay.
This is Rob.
Yep.
Cool.
All right. And we are done with triage.
Sweet.
Everything was a while ago. So, all right, we're assigned. So back to you, Casey.
Cool. Thanks, Dan. Let's take it over to the other Dan Winship, for next item.
Yeah, so a PR went in a few weeks ago to make us use endpoint slice proxying all the time because that's GA now. And there was some discussion about, oh, well, should we delete the Userspace proxy since it doesn't support that yet? And eventually the decision was made, no, let's not do that. But they did remove all of the endpoint controller support from all of the tests, which means, so now we have no E2E CI of the Userspace proxy and no CI E2E or unit testing of the endpoint controller, pretty much. So it seems like either we should revert some of that and bring back some of the endpoint controller unit testing, or at least, or we should just bite the bullet and kill off the Userspace proxy. Except that also then we have to figure out if we're going to kill off the Windows Userspace proxy as well, and we can never know. Antonio points out in chat, there was no Userspace E2E test before. Yes, that's correct. But so before there was at least testing of the endpoint controller stuff, and now there's not. So anyway, we had discussed this like 6 months ago, and everyone was like, oh no, let's not delete the Userspace proxy, but still nobody actually uses it.
I use the Windows Userspace Proxy.
Oh.
I think it's the one.
Not the kernel side though, Jay.
Everyone else uses the kernel. We on the Andreas side currently use the Windows Userspace Proxy. I'm happy to manually test it and maintain it, test results somehow, or if you really want, I can add CI for it. But I don't think it's a big deal for us to eventually get rid of it. We just currently use it right now.
I mean, so full disclosure, Red Hat uses the Linux Userspace proxy.
But only.
I think there was a bit of confusion here on what happened. It sounds like so, and Sweta I think is a bit more familiar with this than I am. But my understanding here is that the endpoints. So basically, there's this package proxy that is inside kubeproxy, and it includes an endpoints adapter and an endpoint slice adapter. And that's the code that changed. And I think Sweta was the one who actually made the PR to remove any use of endpoints API in that shared code. That shared code is very similar to code that exists inside the Userspace proxiers, whether that's Windows Userspace or Linux Userspace proxiers, but it's not actually imported at all by those Userspace. Like they have basically an old, outdated, antiquated copy of what's in package proxy. So we removed, or I didn't remove, but I think Sweta removed those references in package proxy. But there's still the same test coverage for Userspace proxiers that existed before as exists now. The I guess change of sorts is we had some form of test coverage for code that was somewhat similar to what Userspace and proxiers are using inside package proxy, and that's gone. But it wasn't actually the same code. And Sweta, you might have more context here, so I'll hand it off to you if there's anything else.
Yeah, I think you covered everything. Sorry, my mic wasn't working before, so thank you for jumping in. Essentially, the only change that we made is in terms of the test and objects in the proxy is there is the endpoint change tracker. And that was the only thing that was doing endpoints or endpoint slices. Like there was a Boolean there and we removed that. And that is only used by IPVS, IP tables, and the Win kernel. I might be wrong, but none of the user stuff is using it. So as Rob said, the testing wise, we're exactly how we were before that change went in for the user space stuff, which might just, you know, add to the argument. If it's not being maintained, maybe it should be removed. But I think right before we started talking, Jay mentioned that they are still using it and they're willing to maintain it. So maybe adding back coverage might be the right solution here.
Yeah, and there are a few endpoints tests related. Like I looked at the Linux user space kernel and found a few tests that have like on endpoints add and some very basic things. But it's not the same level of test coverage that's in the shared code. I mean, really the ideal is that if we wanted to keep user space proxy, we would update it to use the shared package proxy code, which is similar, but just newer. So Win kernel was the most recent one to go through that transition. And they had their old copy, and I actually forget who was the one who led that effort, but they moved and upgraded to using the shared code. We could do that with other proxy implementations, but so far there hasn't been enough push or usage of user space to justify it.
Right.
We also could move the user space into Kaping. We've got it working and testing well enough that we can, I think, use it. So
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so final. But that is the same coverage. I mean, the only thing that they remove is the endpoint handlers. So the user space proxy was never testing that.
Right. So it sounds like we have not lost any user space test coverage because there wasn't any before. But
right.
I guess like in theory, now we could totally break the endpoint controller and not even notice. Which
what did you mean by
adding stuff controller? Sorry, what was that?
What did you mean by endpoint controller?
Like the thing that creates endpoints objects from services. Like basically nothing in our CI is actually validating that it does, or in our E2E CI is validating that it.
So you mean, okay, now I got it. So you mean that we don't have coverage in the constructor of the bonded frequency thing and all the stuff?
No. I just mean, you know, the deprecated endpoints API, like, you know, we're not testing anymore, which is. I mean,
I think we do have tests. So there's obviously E2E tests for endpoints controller, but you're right that all of kubeproxy, we don't have any tests right now that. Yeah, you're right. I see where you're going now. That because all our E2E tests just test blindly that kubeproxy works. And the only test coverage that includes is kubeproxy with IP tables, IPVS, or Win kernel. That means that we're only testing endpoint slices E2E. So I get that. Yeah. I don't think that's a new change for 122. I think that was a change as soon as endpoint slice proxying went to beta, which would be 119, I think. So it's been an issue for a bit.
Yeah, the question is, do we want to recover? I mean, that's for sure. We don't have that coverage since I don't know. But the thing is, do we want to recover it or not? Because recover is I mean, it's not a complicated thing. It's tedious, but it's straightforward to add a job just to test endpoints, or to move to a different library, or I don't know. I mean, there are technical solutions, but do we want to recover that or not? That's the question. Do we want to recover a test for kubeproxy with endpoints, or not?
I mean,
I think-
either way, if we keep it, we should have a job to test Userspace Proxy. And if we port it to endpoint slice, we should still have a job to test Userspace Proxy mode, right?
I mean, yeah, but we never had a job that tested in user space proxy before.
I know we didn't
Right.
have it before. I'm just saying, like, if we don't kill the Userspace Proxy and remove it, we really should, as a project, have a test for it, regardless of whether we keep it as is or whether we port it.
So okay, so there are two things. So the user space proxy and endpoints. So let's go
Fair
for one first. Is do we want to cover endpoints and queue proxy or not?
I think to do that, we would have to either test the user space proxier or disable a GA feature gate, which the disable a GA feature gate seems like
You can't actually do. It won't let you.
right. So it seems like the only thing we can do is add user space proxy or like it seems like they're inextricably linked.
I guess there may be some EDE tests that like poke at individual endpoints objects to test random things. We don't actually need to test that kube proxy. Like if we don't care about the user space proxier, then we don't need to test that kube proxy with endpoints still works. We just need to make sure there are some tests that, yep, we're still generating endpoints. They still match the endpoint slices. We could do something simpler with that.
Yeah, and I think the endpoint slice EDE test coverage actually tests and verifies both endpoints and endpoint slices, but it's very basic test cases, as I remember. So like if you wanted full EDE, that's like half maybe.
I mean, the other problem is if we've never tested it before and we add a test, are we going to uncover things that we then need to fix? So it's gonna be even more work, right?
I'm thinking this about like, the add a test job with the user space proxy. I'm sure there has got to be a ton of stuff that we never added support to the user space proxy for, right?
I mean, it would be good to know these things and not be obligated to fix them, but still.
I mean, I think if we did know these things, like it would just sort of solidify the decision to kill off the user space proxy.
Yeah, I mean, like topology is definitely not working. And then obviously endpoint slices doesn't work. I have the whole list I can share with folks if they want.
So why are you using the Windows user space rather than Windows kernel? Is there some difficulty in using the Windows kernel proxy?
So the reason is because in Antria, we write a network routing egress rule to open vSwitch and that or to HNS and using an HNS like extension that, and you can't do that if you're using the Windows, like you can't use the Windows kernel space proxy because of the way that we like do the actual like Antria stuff with Open vSwitch. So, and that's related to the fact that Open vSwitch on Windows operates as an extension of the host networking system in Windows. So, yeah.
That sounds like it would actually be fairly difficult for you to migrate to.
Yeah, the thing is it's going to go away eventually. So it's like, I mean, if everybody says, let's just kill user space, I'd agree with it. I just want to say that like, I do use it. So like, but like, if we kill it, let's just like figure out how we're going to kill it. But I think we could probably kill it and find another solution. But what about you all in the Windows and the Linux user space? Why do you use it?
So OpenShift SDN uses parts of the user space proxier to implement unidling, where when you idle a service, it kills all the pods, but keeps the service entry there. And when you connect to it, it uses the user space proxy, which accepts the connection and then sends out a signal that causes a controller to relaunch the pods that back the service, and then it forwards the connection. So it's only using a subset of the functionality, and it's using it in a weird way where we have to have, callbacks and things like that. So when we were talking about this, we realized, we could actually simplify it if we stopped trying to actually use the user space proxy code and just imported the parts of it that we needed. So we could kill it.
So let's just kill it. I mean, does anybody really want to keep it? Because it sounds like this is a theoretical debate, but the two people that use it are totally happy to sort of like kill it off in the next few releases. I mean, I'm pretty sure Antria is not going to need it within the next couple of releases. And even if it did, I think we could port it to Kaping really easily. And I actually want to do that anyways, because it gives me an excuse to get people to use Kaping.
Yeah, I think for entry, as long as we have a sufficient heads up, there is no objection to remove it.
So it sounds like don't delete right away, but we're not upset about the fact that we have no E2E testing and it doesn't support any new features and isn't using the new version of the package proxy endpoint tracking stuff, et cetera, et cetera. And so that means then that also we can remove the rest of the endpoint stuff from the shared code, because now everything that uses the shared code is using endpoint slice. And
I mean,
maybe we can announce that we are planning to deprecate them. And
I would say let's definitely follow a deprecation process and just start that. And then maybe a year from now, we can actually just delete it all.
okay.
So who is going to do it?
Whoever just started typing in the agenda.
Not me. It's probably
Somebody
Casey.
else
He looks
wants to
guilty.
do it. I'm happy to do it if no one else wants to. I mean, or Dan, I mean, I'm not volunteering, but I'm willing to do it if no one else wants to. So let's maybe go do that. Go that route. I guess I'm volunteering now. So yeah, I mean, I'm happy to get this. I'll follow up with people.
All right. Thanks, Jay.
I think that makes me next. Is it possible for me to share my screen? I just had like a 10-minute or less update on Gateway. All right, let me see if I can make this. All right, hopefully this is the right thing.
We get some Slack, Rob.
Oh, sweet.
No presentation, just Slack.
Oh, that's amazing.
And all your passwords.
The secret world. Yeah. Try this again. All right. Maybe
better.
not Slack this time. Okay, sweet. Thank you. All right. So this is, if I can share, it's still working?
Yes, it is.
Cool. All right. So Gateway API V1 Alpha 2, this is going to be pretty quick, but we've been working for a while on Gateway API. Obviously, there's plenty of people who've been working on Gateway API in this meeting even, but I wanted to take this opportunity, like just a few minutes, to run through what we're trying to do for V1 Alpha 2, which I think is going to be a very significant release. We're hoping that V1 Alpha 2 will be our last release with breaking changes. Our only release with breaking changes, at which point our API will be stabilizing and preparing for beta. So this marks a large transition in a lot of different ways. And I wanted to bring this up to SIG Network because we're obviously a SIG Network project. There's a new cap that's associated with this. So one of the things we're doing as the transition to V1 Alpha 2 is moving to the Kubernetes API group, K8s.io. We're currently in the experimental x-K8s.io API group. And we've got an advice that we should move to the official Kubernetes API group. That means that we need to go through formal API review processes. We need this cap. We need a variety of things. So that's what we're working on as part of this V1 Alpha 2 proposal. And that also means we need more interaction with the broader SIG Network community to make sure that what we're doing actually makes sense and that we're getting full API reviews from SIG Network API reviewers as well. So on that note, I'll skip ahead to the last thing. I reached out to Andrew, Dan, Cal, and Tim to ask if they'd be API reviewers for us and set aside some time in August to help run through the entire Gateway API, well, the V1 Alpha 2 Gateway API, and make sure that it makes sense and that, hopefully they find things that we have done that may not make sense or changes we can make. But that's really our goal, is to try and get wide buy-in and also wide feedback from a number of experienced API reviewers. This is not meant to be an exclusive list. If there are other people out there that are interested in this API and want to be involved and want to be reviewing these changes, I would love it. You know, with the Ingress API, we got lots of feedback after the fact, you know, after it was too late to make significant changes about things that were less than ideal about it, that we wish you could have this or that, or we wish you didn't have this, etc. This is the opportunity. This is that point where we can still make those breaking changes, or we can make more significant changes than when we really have to start providing stability, backwards compatibility, and all that. So I think we've come up with a pretty compelling API, obviously biased, but if you have opinions about how an API like this should be structured, this is a really good time to take part, to review, whatever. It's all up there already. It's not like you need to wait till August to review things. The vast majority of it is already in place. So yes, that's what we're thinking about. There is going to be, because we're migrating API groups, etc., there's not going to be any support for conversion between V1 Alpha 1 and V1 Alpha 2. They're going to exist in isolation. There's also going to be breaking changes between these releases, so it would not work. So these two APIs are going to be separate. And as I mentioned, plan for future API releases to be completely convertible. We're targeting August 9 to be ready for final review. So what that means is, as a working group, we've been going through and trying to, you know, reach our own consensus among the working group about API changes that we want to commit to. But then we recognize that when it comes to August 9 and we get the formal Kubernetes API review, we could get feedback that other things need to change. But we are trying to do our own review, our own enhancement proposals and everything else. So you're welcome to be part of that process as well. Again, we're trying to get as many people involved as possible. Now, just from small to large, I want to go through just like some of the changes that we're talking about in V1 Alpha 2. There's nothing huge. Well, I shouldn't say there's nothing huge, but there's a bunch of small things. I won't cover these in any detail because I don't want to take up too much time. But some small changes here. We're also doing some things to comply with API conventions a little bit better. We had some maps for like header matching and query params and etc. That's not API convention, so we moved to lists instead, which is a closer match. Similarly, for our filters, we had a header modification, and that's also moving from a map to a list. So again, small changes. New feature in V1 Alpha 2 is going to be redirects. There's a lot of capabilities there, and we're also working on adding rewrites. And you see in the top right here, this is a shared slide deck, whatever, but we have this concept of GEPs, and they're linked out here, but they're like gateway enhancement proposals. And we've gone through a lot of effort to try and outline why we think an API should be designed the way it is, and provided alternative designs and why we're choosing against them. So you'll see that in the rest of the 3 or 4 slides, that there's a gap for each of these bigger concepts here. We're also, this is a huge one in light of our recent CVE, we are very interested in providing a safe way to do cross namespace references. So people got into trouble by doing cross namespace references maybe unsafely. The Ingress API did not specify it clearly enough. So in this case, we're trying to find a way where we can do this safely. So there's a whole gap about this, but the fundamental idea is that for a reference across a namespace boundary to be safe, both sides need to agree to it. So you need some kind of handshake. So in this case, a route could forward traffic to a service in another namespace, as long as, in this case, a concept of a reference policy allowed references from routes in store namespace to services in my namespace. There's a lot more in the GEP But that's a key concept. And if you're interested in that CVE or our proposed way to do this safely, I would really like more feedback on this one. Policy attachment, this is yet again, this is more of a proposal of a pattern than anything else. And this is describing how we can attach policy and extensions to resources within the API. And it describes how that could work for both the traditional ingress use case, but also there's been some interest in mesh implementations using this same API. So it describes how the same policy attachment mechanism could work for both. And finally, the last thing, route gateway attachment. This is a GEP that's currently in flight. We're exploring different ways that routes and gateways can be attached together and maybe trying to simplify that a little bit. And fundamentally, it means that the route chooses that I want to attach myself to this specific gateway or set of gateways. There's a bit more to it than that, and there's a full GEP about it. But these are the changes we're talking about in Gateway API. Again, August 9 is what we're targeting for being fully ready for V1 Alpha 2 review. But if you're interested in these kinds of topics, if you want to give feedback, if you want to tell us something that we're missing out on or that doesn't make sense, this is a really good time to do it while we can still make those bigger changes. Yeah, that's all I had. Hopefully I didn't go too far over. Any questions? Okay. Cool.
Is GEP something? I mean, why do you guys not use regular caps?
Yeah, so that's a good question. We've been inspired by other SIG projects or working groups like Cluster API is maybe similar to us, and they have a similar concept of a CEP. I don't know how they actually pronounce it, but CEP in their case. There are some things in KEPs that don't really apply to us, like PRD as an example. What we're designing is entirely an API. We're not designing the implementation of that API. So a lot of the PRD process and other concepts in KEPs are a little too involved for something that is purely an API. So this is maybe a simplified version and also focused on API design more than implementation, I guess.
I think like we will eventually go to KEP. It's just at this point, it was pretty high overhead and people basically just deleted almost like 90% of the KEP template. So that's why we just said, hey, just use this simplified one for now. And eventually when we go to beta, obviously it probably will just align to the normal Kubernetes status process.
Okay, I mean, at some point, would it make sense to have a NEP, a networking enhancement proposal, which is sort of in the bucket of networking projects? So otherwise, every API resource could have its own KEP equivalent.
Yeah, the idea for the GEP is not, because we were using just GitHub issues and we were finding it hard to keep track of things. Now, it was discussed in the group, like, should we just go to just use the KEP process? But it was viewed that this incremental step, at least for the next probably 6 months, is sufficient for documentation, and then we would probably just use KEPs. The idea is not to keep this as a continuing thing.
Yeah, I think this is similar to the network policy working group as well, in the sense that we're trying to collaborate on an API design, and in a way, KEPs make that a little difficult. Like if we had a single KEP for Gateway API, that would be really difficult. What we're talking about with GEPs is like there's a GEP for how we do rewrites in Gateway API, which would be pretty overwhelming to go through the entire KEP process for. So these are kind of smaller things where we're trying to collaborate just on a small concept. And maybe as the API stabilizes, KEPs will make more sense. But right now we've got lots of different people that are trying to contribute smaller chunks that I think it would be pretty overwhelming to try and do that all with different KEPs.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, definitely the KEP process is not ideal for every kind of enhancement.
Any other
Right.
questions for Rob?
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So I asked in the chat, how is going to be the release scheduled for Gateway API and the API policy per release? I mean, are you going to follow Kubernetes that one API has to be? I don't remember the rules. I mean,
Yeah, that's a really good question, and to be honest, we're still trying to figure it out. Right now we are completely untied to Kubernetes release cycle, but we of course will follow the backwards compatibility guarantees and everything else associated with a official Kubernetes API. We're kind of going through this relatively new process of an official Kubernetes API that is a CRD. We're not the first, but we're probably one of the largest in scope that's trying to do this. So we're still trying to figure out exactly how that's going to work. Learning as we go, I guess we can say, but with the idea that we will follow all the same backwards compatibility guarantees and everything associated with other official Kubernetes APIs.
Yeah, I think this is probably will become immediately relevant when we go beta. In the alpha phase, it's like, yeah, you can kind of play fast and loose. This is some discussion that we will have to have with SIG Arch, like how to integrate it.
Yeah.
So, what is your estimation to go to beta? 1 year, 6 months?
I would love to do it in under 6 months, but I recognize that it is impossible to predict buy-in, consensus, etc. in open source, and we don't have the same firm timelines because we're CRD that open source Kubernetes release cycles have. So there's nothing that says, well, you have to get to beta by 1/23, 4, whatever it is. So what we're trying to focus on instead is when we have true consensus within the community. Obviously, most of the people working on this API are also trying to build products around it. And we're all very interested in reaching beta just so that we can build products around something that's relatively stable.
And for the conformance, because I remember that Alex and Bowie and you, I think, so there was a repo for some conformance testing or something like that, but it was for Ingress, no? Or it was the same.
That's correct. A lot of the work done there can apply for Gateway API. I have a PR in the Gateway API repo that copies a lot of those concepts over for our own conformance tests, but it has not merged yet. But the idea is to at least share a lot of the code and concepts between the two conformance test setups, but they will be different.
If there are no more questions for Rob, then does anybody have any other topics they wanted to bring up that weren't on the agenda? If there were no other topics that anyone wanted to bring up on the agenda that weren't on the agenda, then I think we're done. Everybody can get 15 minutes back. See y'all in a couple weeks.
Thanks. Bye.